Next up on the schedule is John Guandolo. He operates primarily in the law enforcement arena, and another subject matter expert in Sharia, the global Islamic threat, and the Islamic movement.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing?
Great.
All right. This is going to be a marathon, but I want to just hit a few key points. And the biggest key point I want to start with, and I'm so grateful to follow Bill because it rolls right into what I'd like to talk about, which is how does the enemy, the Marxist and the Islamic enemy, intend to win the war? Well, first, let's start with some basics. 100% of Islamic doctrine, from the elementary school level to the highest schools of Islamic jurisprudence, say that Islam is a complete way of life. Social, cultural, military, political, and religious, all governed by Sharia, which is a real law. 100% of Sharia law mandates warfare against non-Muslims until Sharia is the law of the land and the world, period. There is no such thing as a version of Islam that's not that. Now, my organization, Understanding the Threat, has a standing offer that we make on radio and TV when we do interviews, and we've published this, and a few weeks ago, I actually sent it to one of the leaders of Hamas in the United States, doing business as CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, but I sent it to him a couple years ago. I was just reminding him, since they love to call us names, if there's anything you can demonstrate that we're saying that's untrue about the Islamic movement, about Sharia, its authority in Islam and what it says, we will cease to publish it, we'll remove it from our presentations, and we'll give the person who brings it to our attention $1,000 cash. Now, in the 3+ years now that we've been doing that, how many times do you think we've had to pay out? Zero. Yeah, it's a pretty good tool at shutting imams down who are running their mouths about something we're saying. So I thought a good place to start would be in this book. This is called What Islam is All About. And it's the most widely used textbook for 7th graders in U.S. Islamic schools. And what's interesting about this is it lists the 3 duties of Islam. Dawah, the call to Islam, jihad, and encouraging good and forbidding evil. Good and evil as defined by what? Sharia. Now, of course, I'm sure they mean jihad is spiritual yoga, so let's see what they teach the 7th graders. The word jihad is most often associated with the act of physically confronting evil and wrongdoing, according to Sharia. If anyone dies in jihad, they automatically will go to paradise. And then, oddly enough, they have a picture of a tank here in case the little children are confused. Now, isn't it interesting that in a 7th grade textbook, they teach the same thing ISIS and Al-Qaeda do? And then if you go back here into the back, where it talks about the Islamic State and the greatness of the Islamic State, it says the basis for the legal and political system is the Sharia of Allah. The duty of the Muslim citizens is to be loyal to the Islamic State. That's what Sharia says. What's unbelievable is that is what Sharia is, it is what Islam is. And yet, since and before 9/11, our leaders have told us, Mrs. Clinton, Mr. Bush, Mr. Clinton, John Kerry, and all, up to recently, the Deputy NYPD Commissioner telling us this has nothing to do with Islam. Herbert McMaster, outgoing National Security Advisor to President Trump, that ISIS practices a perverted version of religion, which he said over and over. That's just factually not true. And it's this incoherence and this lack of understanding of the threat, which is why we lost in Afghanistan and why we lost in Iraq. Our military crushes the enemy on the battlefield, and we lose because our leaders, Republicans and Democrats, have failed to identify the threat. The threat is Islam. Their doctrine is Sharia. From the Boston bombers to the shooter in Fort Lauderdale, they all say, we are Muslims waging jihad to establish an Islamic State under Sharia. And they're all correct. And they have never not been correct. As a matter of fact, I encourage you to find something ISIS and Al-Qaeda have published about Islamic law that's wrong. Please try to find it. That's the problem. And yet unanimously in Europe and the United States, we are doing nothing. And why is that a problem? because the largest terrorism financing trial in American history, the Holy Land Foundation against the United States, adjudicated in Dallas, Northern District in 2008, a 15-year investigation by the FBI culminates in this trial where the largest Islamic charity in America is convicted for being a front for the terrorist group Hamas. And the evidence in this trial reveals that all of the prominent Islamic organizations in the United States are part of a stated movement that is identifiable with members, and those include the largest, most prominent Islamic organizations, and their stated objective is to establish an Islamic State under Sharia. And the means to do it, what they say, is civilization jihad, to subvert the society, to influence, to gather intelligence in order to bring the entire society down. And who do our pastors work with when they do interfaith outreach? Those very organizations, the Islamic Society of North America, the Council on American Islamic Relations, the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Who shut down all the training on this? And I created the first training in the U.S. government on this information in 2006. And who shut the remnants of that down 4 years later? The Muslim Public Affairs Council, CARE, the Islamic Society of North America. Who runs the ads on TV saying, hey, don't offend Muslims because it's hurtful? Who's doing outreach on college campuses? Who's working with school boards? These same organizations or organizations that are allied with them under other names. That's the problem. And that has always been the problem. Which is interesting because right now what we're looking at is in the next 6 to 7 years that Sharia-inspired movements in Europe are going to begin folding up Europe. And as was already alluded to, Europe is for the most part already mostly gone because they've culturally surrendered everything that was the foundation of who they were. Now the work of the enemy, the Marxists and the Islamic movement, is left to be finished. So how are they doing it? Well, first let me just share. The Marxists and the Islamic movement both have written strategies that you can actually read, and they're following those strategies. They have networks around the world, but we're talking about the United States, that actually fund, organize, and propel these movements. And as a matter of fact, the focus of the movement is not the violence. The violence serves to get us to turn towards the suit-wearing jihadis and the pleasant Marxists coming at us. It is to get us to turn away. When this goes down in Europe, it is likely, highly likely, if things keep going the way they're going, that the United States policy will support those movements. Remember, we won the war militarily in Iraq and Afghanistan and yet lost. Why? Because we didn't know the enemy. It was the U.S. State Department that created Islamic republics in Afghanistan and Iraq in 2005 under Sharia, thus giving Al-Qaeda exactly what they asked for. In 2005 is when we lost the war, because the enemy achieved their objectives. So why did we keep fighting until now? Because we don't understand the threat. That's why. The strategy that we're doing is so good. Let me ask a question. Are we safer? Are the attacks increasing? Is the Islamic incursion increasing or decreasing since 9/11? How many of you think it's decreasing? The threat is decreasing. For those of you not looking around, nobody raised their hand. That's where we are with this. That is exactly where we are with this. So what's the solution? Number one, speak truth boldly. The problem in both the Marxists and the Islamic movement, in their doctrine, says they're going to get our leaders to do their bidding for them. The Republicans are the hammer for the Marxists. Who just wrote the budget bill yesterday? Just one very simple current event example. Who wrote the constitutions for Iraq and Afghanistan? We did. We did. When the Muslim Brotherhood went to the White House in 2010-11 and said, this training about Islam offends me, they didn't shut it down. The The FBI director shut it down, Mueller. The Secretary of Homeland Security shut it down. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs shut it down. That's civilization jihad by our hands. That's how it works. That's exactly how it works. So what can you do? Number one, you have to know this information. We stand as a resource, Understanding the Threat, understandingthethreat.com. We stand as a resource to help you. We are the only organization in the United States giving citizens and law enforcement not only the information, but tools to identify the jihadi network in their area. We're the only ones giving law enforcement, police, tools to aggressively, investigatively go after them. And we're the only ones giving state leaders a strategy to dismantle the network in their state. Now, we work in a very small group. Probably any of you who follow the counter-jihad movement know there aren't many of us in it doing this. We need to grow our ranks. One of the things we do that we think is very important is training trainers to be able to teach this. We need to multiply what we're doing 100-fold or more. We need support in this war, but I want to make sure everyone understands this is going south fast. And the biggest problem among Republicans is most of them have no idea how bad the Marxist threat is, how badly it's penetrated, although if you listen to the 3 congressmen this morning, you kind of should have gotten a taste of how bad it is. But inside the United States, the Islamic threat controls the language. They control the narrative. And that is where we're going to win or lose the war, is on the narrative. So what else can we do? You got to speak truth. You got to know the threat. But the answer is at the local level. The same way this president got elected at the local and county level is the only way, as Bill Federer likes to say, it's from the bottom up. Pressure from the bottom up. The fact that this discussion is not the main discussion for 6 hours in the big room, not a knock on you, we've already talked about this, is indicative of the fact that we do not understand this threat. And most people that we come across in the quote-unquote Republican circles do not know it. I now have been in Dallas for a year, is where I live now. I've been going around the state since I moved there numerous times a month, speaking to many Republican groups, including the Texas Federation of Republican Women. And when I speak, people's heads explode. And the last thing I want to say about this information is why this is key, is everywhere we go, our primary program is a 3-day program for law enforcement. A day on Sharia, a day on the network, how they're operating, and a day on what do you do as a local state police officer if this is your responsibility, or even if it's not. 100% of them say, we've never heard this, including FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force members, and now, recently, we just had FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force supervisor and fusion center directors who've never heard this information. That is going on right here. The shooters in Garland, Texas that came to kill Pam Geller and others recently, they came from your Islamic Community Center of Phoenix right here, which is a Muslim Brotherhood mosque teaching jihad. And until we deal with the network and we call the enemy for what it was, we cannot and will not win. Thank you, and God bless you.